Time now to take a look at what's grabbing headlines in today's newspapers. And for that, I'm joined here on set by Solange Moujat. Hello, Solange.
Hi, Nadia.
First of all, you're starting off with the EU-China summit, that's being held today by video conference.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a full summit of 27 European members, but coronavirus obliged. It's now just trade talks via video conference with Chinese officials, EU chiefs, Angela Merkel. But it doesn't mean that the trade and the investment deal that they're discussing, that they've been working towards for 7 years, isn't, as L'Opinion calls it, the challenge of the Union. Now, the French paper says on its front page that Merkel wants tangible results, but the major impediment that the paper says is that EU leaders do not see eye to eye on a number of key issues in regard to Beijing, ranging from intellectual property rights to human rights in Hong Kong. And as you can see in L'Opinion's cartoon by CAC, you have China portrayed as a red pangolin and a bunch of red ants that are supposed to be the EU leaders discussing. Now, one says, we need to organize a counterattack, and another says, but we still need to be fair play. So we'll see how that plays out. Politico, for their part, argues that because Beijing has come on so strong with what's being called wolf warrior diplomacy, or an aggressive approach by its diplomats, picking fights with countries that criticize them, Beijing's handling of the coronavirus, that this has raised red flags, according to Politico, for many EU nations, and this has created pressure within Brussels to come up with a more coherent and perhaps equally aggressive, we'll see, pushback by the EU bloc.
All right, let's move on now, Solange, and look at the picture in Israel at the beginning of this week, where they are scheduled to start a new 3-week coronavirus lockdown.
Yeah, and as the Jerusalem Post tells us, schools are going to close. People won't be able to go more than 500 meters from their homes starting September 18th. And there's quite a bit of anger here directed towards Benjamin Netanyahu about that you can find in the Israeli press. Ynet says that Netanyahu has failed in his one job, helping the Israeli people suffering from COVID. Go, Bibi, go. Now, this isn't go as in like, rah, rah, you can do it. It's in a sort of go away. The site says, referring to the fact that Netanyahu is signing a treaty with the UAE and with Bahrain in Washington. And it addresses the prime minister saying, quote, it is hard to view the reality when you live in your alternate world of power, paranoia, and legal battles, end quote.
Yeah, so while we're seeing in the Israeli press plenty of criticism of Netanyahu, it's also full of praise for that EU-Bahrain-Israel deal.
Yeah, in an editorial in the Jerusalem Post, the normalizing of relations with Arab states is, quote, a cause for celebration, for it ends a state of hostile relations and creates an opportunity to work together, end quote. Meanwhile, in the Palestinian press, Al-Quds describes the agreement as, quote, a stab in the side, and it predicts that Arab nations normalizing with Israel, and there may be others as well, soon to come, will soon realize that they can't really rely on the U.S. or rely on Israel. And then all they will have done is, quote, thrown ash in the eye of the Palestinian people, end quote. And that's from Al-Quds. Now, these long-term questions and implications of such rapprochements is also the subject of an article in the New York Times today. The Times says Israelis see these alliances as the potential starting point of reshaping their place in the Middle East as a chance to no longer be the outsider. But like Al-Quds, like Al-Quds hints as well, the long-term ease of such relationships may be tested by the alliances and the animosities with other countries like Turkey.
Yeah, very interesting stuff indeed, Solange. Now, meanwhile, the EU's relationship with Turkey is back in the headlines today. This is because of a Turkish research ship that created a row with Athens. It's now returned to the port in Turkey, and it seems to have calmed some tensions, but there's still plenty of animosity.
Yeah, and perhaps the most significant warning sign of all of this is the Rafale fighter jet that's on the cover of Le Figaro today. And as the conservative French paper tells us, Greece has announced it is ordering 18 of these French fighter jets, as well as other weapons, to shore up its and Europe's position in the Mediterranean. So there's armed power, as we see with these jets, but there's also been quite a bit of verbal mudslinging going going on as well. As Le Courrier International tells us, the Turkish press is widely covering the threats by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan this past Saturday aimed at Emmanuel Macron to, quote, not mess with the Turkish people or with Turkey, end quote. From Hurriyet, that explains that this isn't the first verbal back and forth between the two men, to the Daily Sabah, which in one editorial calls Macron, quote, the Napoleon of rubbish, end quote, and in another, an unreliable figure that's trying to cover up his own failings at home. So the ship that's created all of this tension between Turkey and the EU may be back in Turkey, but coverage shows that the underlying issues are still very much there.
Yeah, I think that's very clear, Solange. Finally, then, as is always the case with Solange, something quite different to end our press review, because you have something for us about baggy trousers.
Yes, I call them pants in American English, but get out your saggy pants, I would say, for the rule that was pegged: if no ifs, ands, and buts, baggy pants are not allowed. Well, this rule is no longer on the books. Now, what is this about? It is a law. There was a law in South Florida that was in place for 13 years, and it has finally been removed after much debate about whether it was discriminating against certain populations, such as the African American youth population. So if you were in Opa Loca City, you can now wear the trousers where you can see your underpants if you want.
Without being fined.
Yes, exactly, without being fined.
Well, there we are. A little bit of unexpected news from Solange Mougin, and that brings us to the end of our press review. But as always, if you'd like more from Solange and our team, you can head to our website, france24.com, to take a look at some more press reviews there.